Thanks again for joining, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and I hope not good night for anyone. I hope you know that this will be recorded, so if you're staying up late for this, you might want to wait for that recording instead. But let's see here. I'm Joe. I'm a product manager at Apollo. And I'm here to give you a quick product and roadmap update on Studio, the registry, and Managed Federation. This is a follow-on from the update that we gave about a month ago, where Nathan gave kind of an overall roadmap update. Today we'll be focused on sort of the delivery side of Apollo Studio, and specifically some improvements that we've made around Managed Federation. So to set the context a little bit, where we are today, why are we all here? It wouldn't be an Apollo GraphQL talk without a pretty slide showing the benefits of the unified graph. So we're all digitally transformed, right? We're done here. Of course not. We know that we're all at different stages of our graph journey. I previously came from a role where I was an API product manager at Zendesk, responsible for many legacy REST APIs. And I'll admit, I honestly resisted the graph for a while, but really what changed my mind was when Apollo introduced Federation. The developer experience of GraphQL combined with Federation to manage requests across many different services and provide a single cohesive and efficient access point to all of your data across services and integrations is really just too powerful to ignore. And so I know we're all at different stages in this journey, but what Federation offers is, once you've stood up your first graph and really seen the value that GraphQL provides, the next challenge is getting everyone else onto the graph with you, getting all of your data into the graph. And so Federation offers, we believe, the most powerful approach to unifying your services into a single common graph while empowering your individual teams to control their own domain and continue to operate as much as they can independently without sacrificing velocity. So to make this happen seamlessly and at scale, we've learned a lot over the years, and we know that companies are really going to need some additional tooling. And so this is where Managed Federation comes into play. So with a common graph, the value of your graph grows exponentially with each new service. It can grow exponentially with each new service, but the complexity of maintaining it yourself also grows. So with Federation, you can compose many different GraphQL services, each with their own schemas, together into a unified data graph. But that begs the question, how do you manage change in such an environment? How do you ensure that changes originating from any number of subgraph services are safe and work together? That might seem simple, with a couple of services, but once you get up into tens or dozens of services, it really starts to feel complex. And so how do you make sure that your updates are seamless and that you don't incur any downtime when you're releasing changes to your data graph? Managed Federation tackles a lot of that complexity and enables your developers to update their own subgraph schemas at their own pace, while we automatically orchestrate the composition of schemas and release of the schema changes to your API consumers. On top of that, with schema checks in Apollo, you can even do a dry run of each change and see precisely how your proposed changes would impact your clients based on their previous usage that we observe. So to get even more specific for today, we're going to focus on the delivery pillar of Apollo's product. And that is my focus today and every day, but that will be the focus of our talk today. And this is also the focus of our entire growing Gravity group here at Apollo. And we talk about this as graph delivery. So again, why are we here? So great, GraphQL is good, Federation's great, Managed Federation's even better, but what do we have for you today? Well, we have a couple of updates to share with you that are available today. We've got some more that are coming soon, and some more that we'd like to give you kind of a peek at that's coming probably over the summer. So I've broken it down into three sections. First, what's available now. We'll give a quick update on kind of where things stand, some of the things that we've released over the last couple of weeks, including the concept of subgraphs, builds, and our new uplink mechanism. Then we'll get into some upcoming features like the launch dashboard and gateway schema reporting. And then thirdly, we'll start to dive into contracts, which is a feature that we're very excited about. We hope to have a preview out for some of our enterprise customers very soon. So first, let's start with what's available today. Before we get into what's coming over the summer, I really want to make sure that everyone is up to speed with some of the recent changes that we've made to Studio, the registry, and Managed Federation. So first, we introduced the concept of the subgraph and the supergraph schema as we introduced managed composition. So if you saw our last update, you know we introduced this idea of managed composition. Managed composition means that now, instead of letting your gateways compose multiple schemas on the fly, we actually pre-compose those schemas for you in the registry, and then we provide a static artifact to the gateway or graph router. So with managed composition, we also wanted to improve our kind of mental model and start to build for the future. And so we introduced the concept of subgraphs. You might be familiar with the term implementing services. That term is gone now, and we're using subgraphs. And there's more behind that as well. So subgraphs represent the services that make up your unified supergraph or your federated graph. Subgraphs allow your teams to retain at least some level of control over their slice of the domain and have, and we have some more changes coming to composition itself in the near future to give subgraph teams even more independence and control over their part of your graph. And building on that, even into the future, we want subgraphs to work more like full graphs in Apollo Studio with the full set of Studio tools available to them, including notifications, operations, permissions, etc. But that's getting a little bit ahead of myself. I couldn't help but tease it here. So specifically what you can see in Studio today is in the schema reference under the SDL tab, you can now see all of your subgraphs listed out. You can see each subgraph that makes up your overall federated graph and see details about that subgraph schema. Drilling in a little bit more, we also added the ability to associate some metadata with those subgraphs, things like contact information for the team. And we really see this as easing collaboration, and we have a lot more to come here. So your developers, the consumers of your graph, when they're browsing your schema reference, they can now easily find who they need to talk to about any given field in your schema. And we really think that a huge part of our role is in enabling that kind of seamless collaboration. So with that, we're also introducing the concept of a build. And a build is the process of constructing a supergraph schema. So you might be familiar with the term composition. Builds are workflows that include schema composition for federated graphs. And that gives us two new features today. We're introducing build checks as well as build webhooks. So first, build checks. You may have seen some of this start to show up in our UI as composition checks. We're now framing that as build checks, as builds encompass even more than composition. And we'll get into more details on that in the future. But you can see this in the Studio UI. When you navigate to the checks UI, you can now see multiple steps under checks. And today that's build and operations. So a build check is run before Studio can run an operation check on the build schema. And it lets you know if your subgraph schemas can be combined into a safe supergraph schema for your gateway. Where before you sort of get an error in the CLI and it could be hard to determine sort of what happened or why it wasn't able to successfully compose or build. Now you can open up Studio and get all the details on your build checks, including their pass-fail status, detailed errors, excuse me, for the failed build checks, and the resulting schemas from successful builds. So here you can see a successful build, and you can start to see here that we've turned checks into workflows. So these are now framed as check workflows that can include multiple steps. Initially, that will just be build and operations checks for federated graphs, but we see a lot of future potential to introduce new types of checks into check workflows as well. And so if your build check is failing, you can drill in here on the build details page or on the check details page and see detailed error messages in Studio so that you can resolve that issue before attempting to update your gateway. Build checks really protect your graph consumers from experiencing any downtime or hiccups due to a failed build. And they shorten the time to resolution for you when your subgraphs get out of sync. In addition to build checks, we're also introducing build webhooks. So you'll be able to get webhook notifications when you publish a schema that causes a broken build. You'll also be able to get webhooks on successful builds. So build webhooks allow you to receive notifications when builds are failing and notify the right people or systems. So this is just one small part of our sort of ongoing effort in 2021 and beyond to make the Apollo registry a more open platform. So we see some potential use cases here, trigger notifications when builds fail, trigger CI/CD workflows, archive schemas to some other storage mechanism, and just generally integrate, potentially spin up routers, run additional schema tests. We've seen a lot of interesting use cases from some of our enterprise customers, and we're excited to see what you all do with webhooks. Lastly, on the kind of current updates, we also released something we call Uplink. And so once a supergraph schema is successfully built in the registry through managed composition, it needs to be delivered to the gateway. And that's where Uplink comes in. So you don't need to know too much else about Uplink, except that it's really built to work and be a reliable part of your infrastructure. So it's a critical piece of using federation at scale and production. And we made it even more secure and observable to ensure schema updates make it to your gateways safely and securely. And we'd love to hear feedback about this as well. We built Uplink to be really extensible and provide lots of options for sort of how we can provide that schema to your gateways. We know that customers have very specific needs around providing that schema update to their running gateways. And so we've built Uplink with that in mind. And that brings us to the even more exciting part. So everything that you've seen so far is available today. Some of the build UI changes, I believe, are actually landing today. And Uplink is in preview right now. You can get access to it today, but it will be promoted to general availability very soon. So if you're ready to start testing it out, we're ready to have you use it. So what's left in this presentation is the future. So I, in part, have to give myself this warning because I get so excited about what we're working on, but I need to make it clear to you all that what I'm about to show you includes some speculative designs, and some of the specifics are almost certain to change. So this is in-flight work, but we're excited to start sharing it with you today. So, but do, for legal reasons, do check with Apollo before you make any decisions based on what I'm about to show you. All right, with that said, today we're also introducing the concept of a launch in Apollo Studio. And we're offering a glimpse at some of the new features to go with it. So first, I just want to focus on this term. So why launch and why not deploy or release? And really it comes down to the fact that your API schema is not the same as code. It's your API's documentation. It's in many ways a contract. It's essentially a product. Experience as an API product manager, I think it's really valuable for us to start thinking about our APIs as products. And so the point here is updating a schema it's really significant, and it differs from just updating code. It is and should be released separately. So delivering a schema change is much more like a feature launch to your API than a code deploy, and it requires some additional controls and visibility. So I pulled the kind of dictionary definition of launch here, to start and set in motion, and the Apollo specific definition, which is the process of delivering changes to a deployed and documented graph. So with the introduction of launches, you'll be able to track every change published to your graph from start to finish. The launch dashboard in Studio specifically provides transparency into the graph delivery process and enables more efficient cooperation for large teams and even larger graphs. If you use Apollo Studio to manage your federated graph, you'll be able to track changes in real time and back in history. So if you want to know what happened about a particular change or at a particular time, you can get that information with the new launch dashboard. And to support the launch dashboard and make the registry even more of a powerful tool, we're also introducing gateway schema reporting. So if you've worked with Apollo for a while, you may have heard of schema reporting from Apollo Server. This is a lot like that, but it sort of closes the loop on the other end. So to really supercharge the launch dashboard, we wanted to make sure that we could close that loop and understand when the launch was complete. Schema reporting really closes that loop, so you know exactly what's happening in your production gateways and routers right now, this second. So the launch dashboard itself is really, we like to think of it as your launches or your graph's launch control center. So as you push schema updates to your new graphs, new supergraph schemas are built, checked, and then launched to your running fleet. So that sounds simple, and it's a simple concept, but there's a lot of complexity behind the scenes. And we realized that we were sort of hiding that from you in the Studio UI, and we really want to make Studio more transparent and enable you to get the information that you need directly from our UI. So the new launch dashboard is designed to give you access to detailed information about every change, every build, every launch, including changes or builds or launches that failed, where our changelog gives you access to sort of the resulting schema. The launch dashboard gives you granular information into kind of the life cycle of each change, including changes that never actually made it out to your gateways. And it will also provide you with a real-time look into active launches with gateway reporting. So without too much further ado, let's take a look at the designs. So this is the upcoming launch dashboard in Apollo Studio. And I know there's a lot on this screen, so we'll take another second here to kind of scan over it, and then we'll dive into some of the specific sections. And we'll start here in the bottom left with what we call the launch history. So launch history really allows you to see the full evolution of your graph with a complete history of changes down to the subgraph schema level. It enables you to search and filter through that history of changes to find a specific change that you're looking for. You can see on the top here, those are some of the filters available. You can filter by time window, by the originating subgraph, and even by launch specific information. And then from here, you can also drill down into event level data for precise analysis of what happened with a launch. So over here on the right, you get the launch details when you select a launch. This essentially provides you with an event log of the graph delivery lifecycle. It provides you with access to the historical schema and build reference, and it provides access to quick access to gateway reporting and check details for each change. So you can see here on the left, this sequence of events starts with when the launch was initiated and will include some additional information on how that was initiated, through the build being completed, the schema being made available to your gateways through uplink, the operations checks running, which we run as part of every launch, all the way through to that schema actually being published once the gateways report that schema being available back to Studio. It also gives you additional information and quick reference here to the results, like what happens when a new schema goes live. So it gives you access to the changelog entry, the reference update, the Explorer update, and even a representation of the notifications that were sent out. So here's another example of the launch details page, which really highlights the fact that launch details gives you real-time updates to in-flight launches. So when you're releasing a new schema, you can actually sit on this page and watch the launch happen. In this example, this launch stopped because the build failed. And this should give you clear information about sort of how far that launch got and where any failures were introduced. And this UI gives you granular timestamps and error reports, and really enables you to see what went wrong, when, and why. And if you'll notice up here, this also gives you quick, easy access to view the build errors right in line. Lastly, we're really excited about the flight monitor. So the launch dashboard will include an in-flight monitor of what is happening in your gateways right now. And we have more planned on this in the future, but we wanted to start getting this incorporated into the launch dashboard. So this will tell you which schemas are being reported by your gateways, how that is changing over time, and even give you an indication of error trends to help you quickly and easily spot a schema launch gone wrong. And this is all powered by gateway schema reporting. So this is, like I said, this is really us closing the loop and allowing the gateway to report back to Apollo Studio once it is updated to a new schema version, and tell Studio and tell you what schema is running live in production right now. So Apollo Gateways will report back to Studio to let you know when your launch is complete. And once all of your gateways have been updated, Studio notifies the clients and updates the docs. So today, once you push a new schema change, we notify clients and we update the docs. But sometimes there is a little bit of drift between when you start to update the gateways and when they have all successfully been updated. So this really gives you that confidence to know that once your docs are live, it's because all of your gateways are live. So that brings us to our last topic, which is a quick peek at our next major feature for graph delivery in Apollo Studio, and we call it contracts. So for a little context, I know this term is sometimes unfamiliar to people, but in the world of API management, you'll often hear people talk about API contracts. API contracts are a form of agreement between the people producing the API, who we call the graph producers, and the people consuming the API, the graph consumers. So in the REST world, which I lived in for a long time, the documentation really served as the contract. You treat your schema reference, your API reference, your API documentation as the contract. It's sort of the binding terms of what you agree to support. But with GraphQL schemas, that introduces some complexity here. The GraphQL schema is meant to be the documentation. But if that's true, then how do you control the scope of your commitment? How do you put things in your API without necessarily exposing them to the whole world? And so, at Apollo, we're fortunate enough to get to work with some of the most innovative software development teams in the world, frankly, and learn from their experience building massive data graphs. One thing that we've learned early on is the power of federation in the unified graph. The unified graph is sort of like your internal directory of data. It's fantastic for surfacing what data is available and making it easy to discover and access that data. But sometimes the unified graph is just too much and you want to control who can see what. We've seen all sorts of use cases like client-specific APIs. Maybe you have part of your graph or part of your API that's really just tailored to a mobile client or to a particular integration. Maybe you want to expose part of your API, part of your graph, a subset of it as sort of a public API while keeping some things internal. Same thing with partner APIs. You might want to provide differing levels of access to different integration partners. Sometimes you have backends, BFFs, backends for front ends that are really only relevant to a particular client, and you want to make sure that that's not kind of cluttering your graph. You might have internal tools APIs. They all have a specific scope of concern, really a subset of the larger graph. And that is why we're introducing contracts and why we're so excited about it. So let's get into a quick example. And this is definitely a made up example, but I think it will illustrate what we're talking about here. So in this case, we have a customer profile example. The customer profiles contain sensitive data. Almost always customer profiles contain sensitive data. And so if you want to open up access to developers, you need to control who can access what. So for example, for a partner API, you might not have sharing agreements in place. And so you have to, that's supposed to say must. You must protect any PII, personally identifiable information. And for a public API, your customers can use directly. You may want to hide some internal information that's just kind of a concern to employees at your company. So, putting sensitive fields into your unified graph that you're exposed to everyone is really inviting unintended disclosures. You can expect your consumers to know what they should and shouldn't touch, your client developers. And written docs are great, but we really need something stronger. We need to make it easier for them to know what they should be accessing and what they shouldn't be. And why? Because getting this wrong has major implications, not only for your graph, but for your business. Unintended API disclosures make the news these days. And so we all want to stay out of the news, I think. So our solution is contract schemas, or we're calling the feature contracts. So with contracts, one graph in Studio can have multiple different contract schemas. Contract schemas contain a filtered subset of your base schema. They can be used to simplify documentation and improve the developer experience. They can also be used for enforcement of access by deploying a gateway to serve a specific contract schema. They're also kept in sync automatically by Studio. So they're kept in sync with the base or source schema of your graph. So as you update your base schema, those updates flow through to the contract schemas. We've talked about them as sort of derived schemas or even following schemas. And they also improve collaboration ultimately between client and server. And that's so much of what we're trying to do with GraphQL, but often can be lost when you put everything in one unified schema. So the mechanism through which you'll be able to define contracts is a new directive, the tag directive. So your developers will be able to go right into the subgraph schemas and start tagging fields. And tags don't have a direct impact, and we think that's an important distinction, but they allow you to annotate the schema and sort of start to layer in some additional metadata. These tags are repeatable and they're additive across subgraphs, so your teams can move safely and independently. Filters, which I'll talk about in a second, select fields based on tags to provide that layer of control beyond just what's in the schema. And so filters are what you'll define in Studio, whether through the Studio UI or some configuration through our Rover command line interface. But every update to the base schema is then passed through a defined contract filter to update the associated contract schema. If you're familiar with Studio, that'll be a graph variant in Studio. Graph contributors will be able to define filters and either include or exclude fields by the applied tag directives. And that comes with some built-in conflict resolution using least privilege principles. We won't get too much more into the weeds on this webinar, but we would love to chat with you if you have specific feedback on this. So to continue that example, with my sort of unified schema in the center, I have all of the fields on my customer profile, and I've tagged some of them. For example, I've tagged name with PII and email with PII, and a Boolean that indicates whether or not they're a VIP customer. We've tagged that with internal. And then that allows me to define filters. In this case, maybe I want to create a public profile API to allow users to update their own profiles. I do want to allow them access to their own personally identifiable information or personal identifying information, but I want to exclude my own internal concept of whether they're a VIP customer or not. So I just define a public profile filter, which excludes the fields with the tag internal, and that creates a public profile contract for me. Similarly, with the partner API, I might want to include those internal fields, but exclude any PII fields. So I can do that again with a filter off of that base schema. So this is how you can have you can maintain one base schema, but then derive multiple contract schemas from it. And here, this is just to drive home the point that those tags will not be visible to your consumers. We will filter those tags out, and ultimately your consumers will just see a schema scoped down to exactly what they need to see. Lastly, with contracts, you actually get a choice. So you get to choose if you want to deploy this contract as its own API, which gives you enforcement, it gives you support for introspection, or do you want to just use it to simplify documentation and developer experience? Maybe you already enforce access at the subgraph level, but you just want to sort of control scope of the schema that's surfaced to a developer. You can do that as well. So contracts gives you a lot of flexibility around how you actually use and enforce access to parts of your schema. We believe it's an incredibly powerful tool. We're really excited to start sharing more. So with that, I have one last call out to join our community. So we'll be sharing more updates in our GitHub community. You can find it under GitHub Apollo GraphQL, Apollo Studio community. We'll be sharing some more previews in there, and we're really hoping to start getting some more feedback from our customers. Also, we hope to have an early version of contracts available for our Studio Enterprise customers to try out, to pilot this summer. And I followed up to clarify that means Northern Hemisphere summer, so in the June to August window. With that said, I would love to start taking questions and getting some feedback from you all. And here's the customary Apollo launch slide. All right, I'm going to have to stop sharing to get access to these questions, I believe. All right, well, we have fine-grained controls over features such as mark changes as safe of schema checks with launch control tool. It will help to authorize the set of developers that maintain specific subgraphs to be able to allow breaking changes related with their own domain. Good question. So this is something that we do have planned, but I did not cover today. So I did allude to some of the changes that we hope to make in the future around subgraphs and allow subgraph teams to operate essentially as full graphs within Studio with their own level of checks. So this is something that we do have our eye on, but I can't give you a specific commitment around when that will be ready today. Oh, and I'm new to this Zoom thing, so I just clicked answer the question live. Another question is from Ankit. What is the timeline we're looking at for contracts to be GA? Yeah, it's a good question. It will depend somewhat on the feedback that we get from our early pilot customers, but we hope for at least the sort of first version of contracts to be generally available in Q3 of this year. So that's the regular Q3, so July, August, September timeframe. But again, that may change based on customer feedback. If there are certain features that we really need to incorporate for it to be valuable, then we may need to spend more time sort of getting those ready before we go live. I'm not seeing any other questions at the moment. Oh, there we've got one from Jay. Do we have to define the contract schema filters via the Apollo Studio UI, or will we be able to define it via infrastructure as code? Very good question. So I think I alluded to this a little bit, but I'll be more specific. We fully intend for you to be able to define the filters via infrastructure as code. So I mentioned that you will be able to sort of see them and edit them in the Studio UI. But we also will be working with our new Rover CLI to make it easy for you to actually define a configuration file, which then gets synced with Studio. And so you can manage it as code that way. From Michael, we have, does the uplink feature work more as a push as opposed to the current method of gateway polling for changes? No, actually, uplink continues to use a polling mechanism. Uplink uses a more secure method to allow the gateways to poll, and we're looking into ways to sort of accelerate that polling as well. But we also see that gateway schema reporting, as well as something that I didn't mention, which is out-of-band error reporting from the gateways, will sort of tighten that relationship up a little bit more. So the gateways will be able to report back to Studio when they're unable to get a new schema, and we'll also have them report back once they are running a new schema. So that relationship is being tightened, but it is actually still a polling model. There are some important reasons for that. We can follow up after this if you want to hear more about that. All right. I'm not seeing any more questions come in. So I think with that, we can, oh, there's one more. Are there any roadmap items related to operational metrics or improving support of Datadog distributed tracing? Yes, Nick. So we are currently working on a new approach to how we enable APM integrations. So right now, our Datadog integration flows through our infrastructure. We're actually looking into enabling some open telemetry so that the gateway can actually report kind of more granular metrics directly to APM providers like Datadog or solutions like Prometheus. So we want to be a little less vendor specific, where in the past like with Datadog, we built the specific integration from our cloud. We want to both improve performance and flexibility and allow you to integrate more directly with any APM provider. So there will be more updates on that. That's with another product manager on our Gateway and Federation team, but I believe he'll be giving an update on that pretty soon, and I'll make sure that he does. If the field, from Conrad, if the field is being restricted to a particular audience, can one change tag to something like at only in Studio? I'm not sure that I understand the question. We chose tag initially as sort of the most flexible solution. We're certainly looking at other directives and sort of more direct control within the schema, because we have heard from some customers that they don't actually need that level of indirection and they would rather just manage it in the schema. But we wanted to make sure that we supported some of our enterprise customers who have a need to sort of define those rules outside of the schema and essentially lock down access to sort of who can define contracts and their respective filters. And so we see potentially building more functionality in that area as well, where we'll start to enable you to define policies around who can control filters. I hope that answered your question. If not, please follow up. Now from Naveen, are there any plans to extend the tag annotation to use for more functionality like calculating the cost of field? That's getting a little further out than I want to speak about today, but we see a lot of potential for things like the tag directive to allow you to annotate things like field cost and other sort of policy information. So the vague answer is yes. I'm not sure that it will necessarily be the tag directive specifically, or if we'll introduce sort of a cost directive. Stay tuned on that front. All right, I'm not seeing any more. We'll give it another minute. But thank you all for your attention and the great questions. Ooh, one more from Conrad. What is Apollo doing to help non-JavaScript languages to level up with these new features? Another very good question. Another one that I'm not the best person to answer. We are absolutely looking to invest in non-JavaScript frameworks and communities. You may have seen our new Rover client. Our new Rover client is actually built in Rust. And so I will tell you that we're investing a little bit, you can see this from our own careers page, that we're investing in the Rust ecosystem as sort of our next step. But we do also support the GraphQL Java library, and we'll continue to do so. And we're looking right now at other ecosystems to invest in further. So if you have specific languages or sort of specific ecosystems that you'd like to see get a little bit more love from Apollo, definitely let us know. All right, we have no open questions. Last call, or if there aren't any more, I think we'll wrap it a couple minutes early. I was so worried about my presentation running long and not getting to the good stuff that I managed to make it very efficient. Thank you all for your attention. The questions have been very useful. Like I said in the presentation, if you have additional questions or additional feedback on these things, check out Apollo, or check out the GitHub Apollo Studio community. If you just search for Apollo Studio community, that should pop up. We'll take issues there, we'll respond to them, and we'll also share some sort of further updates as posts there. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.